Long ago, when the land of the American West was still wild and wide, groups of settlers crossed mountains, rivers, and prairies in covered wagons. Among them was a young boy named Eli. He was 9 years old and traveled with his family in search of a new beginning in the unknown West. One evening, as the prairie turned golden under the setting sun, Eli sat by a crackling fire. The air was cool, and the smell of wood smoke mixed with something warm and savory. His mother stirred a small pot over the flames. From a worn cloth bag, she took out dried beans, cornmeal, and a small slab of cured bacon. "What are we eating tonight?" Eli asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. "The same thing pioneers have eaten for years," she smiled. "A meal that keeps us strong on the trail. Hot beans, corn cakes, and a little dried venison, if we're lucky." As the fire warmed the night, she cooked the beans with bits of bacon and wild garlic they'd found along the way. She poured cornmeal onto a hot stone and flipped flat cakes until they were golden and crisp. These simple treats, called Jana cakes, were a favorite on the trail. Eli ate slowly, savoring every bite. The food was plain, but comforting, the kind that makes your heart feel full. It tasted like courage, like hope, like long days and quiet dreams beneath the stars. Later, she soaked dried apples in warm water for a soft, sweet dessert. The taste reminded Eli of home, even in the middle of nowhere. Wrapped in a warm blanket, listening to the wind brush through the grass, Eli drifted off to sleep. The fire still glowed beside him. He knew, deep in his heart, that the simplest meals, shared with love, could turn even the wildest frontier into something that felt like home. The next morning, Eli awoke to the sound of wagon wheels creaking and birds calling out across the plain. His father had already rekindled the fire, and the smell of something roasting floated through the camp. For breakfast, they ate fried salt pork with leftover Jana cakes and a strong, dark drink made from roasted chicory root, a common coffee substitute for pioneers. Eli winced at the bitter taste, but his father chuckled. "That's the flavor of the trail, son." Later that day, as the wagon train rolled onward, Eli saw his mother foraging by the trail. She picked wild onions, berries, and sheep sorrel, tart little leaves that tasted like lemons. They would use them in a special pie for dinner. "We don't have much," she said softly, "but we use everything we find." At midday, the group stopped near a stream. Eli watched as a group of older boys tried to fish with hand lines, while others gathered firewood. Lunch was simple: hardtack biscuits softened in hot water with beans, and a spoonful of molasses if anyone had some left. Some families even had a bit of dried apple butter to spread on bread. That night, something magical happened. One of the hunters returned with a rabbit, and the mothers made a stew in a large iron pot. They added wild greens, a few dried carrots, and thickened the broth with flour. It was the best meal Eli had ever tasted. As the stars came out again, and the firelight danced on the canvas of the wagons, Eli listened to the soft hum of voices and the occasional coyote howl in the distance. He snuggled into his bedroll, belly warm and mind full. He dreamed of gardens in the wilderness, of streams full of fish, and of someday planting corn on his own land. He dreamed of food made with patience, shared with love, and carried with them across miles of wild hope. The days grew longer as the wagon train made its way west. Dust clung to their boots, and the sun painted their cheeks in shades of brown and gold. But every evening, when the wheels stopped turning and the campfires were lit, the smell of dinner brought everyone back to life. Eli began helping more with meals. He learned how to grind dried corn into meal with a small hand mill. His fingers turned rough, but he was proud. His favorite part was helping shape the dough for ash cakes. Flat rounds of dough cooked right in the embers, then brushed off and served warm. "Food tastes better when you make it yourself," said Mr. Tom, an old trapper who shared stories and dried bear meat. He told Eli how to survive on pemmican, a mix of dried meat, melted fat, and berries, a powerful food that kept hunger away for days. One evening, a storm rolled in. The skies turned gray, and rain pounded the canvas tops of the wagons. There was no fire that night. People ate cold biscuits, dry jerky, and huddled together, telling stories to keep warm. Despite the hardship, Eli didn't feel afraid. He felt strong, like he was part of something bigger. The next morning, the storm had passed. Birds sang again, while the adults fixed wagon wheels and washed soaked clothes. Eli and a friend found wild serviceberries in a bush near the river. They brought them back in their hats, and the mothers made a tiny pot of berry jam, shared by the spoonful. That night, the group sang around the fire. Their voices were tired, but full of heart. Eli fell asleep on his mother's lap, the stars above him, the scent of wood smoke in the air, and the taste of wild berries still on his tongue. He dreamed not of cities or riches, but of a little log cabin in the valley, a warm hearth, and the joy of planting his first garden. Days turned into weeks. The wagon train moved through forests, crossed rivers, and climbed hills. The land began to change. It was greener now, with open valleys and soft hills rolling like blankets under the sky. One evening, the leader of the caravan stood and pointed to the horizon. "There," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Beyond those trees, the valley we've been dreaming of." Eli's heart leapt. That night, around the fire, the pioneers celebrated. They didn't have much, but they shared what they had: a little dried peach pie, a pot of bean stew with smoked rabbit, and corn mush sweetened with wild honey found near the stream. Everyone ate slowly, savoring not just the food, but the moment. It wasn't just a meal. It was a memory. After supper, Eli's mother took out a tiny cloth pouch. Inside were seeds, corn, squash, and beans. "These came from my mother," she whispered. "Tomorrow we'll plant the first ones." That night, Eli slept not beside a fire, but under a young tree in the valley. Fireflies danced above him like floating stars. He dreamed of fields, golden and tall, and of meals cooked in their own cabin, made from food they grew with their own hands. He saw himself carrying a basket of vegetables, laughing as the wind swept through the leaves. He dreamed of fresh bread, made from their own cornmeal, and stew with real potatoes they had dug together. And in that dream, as the sun rose, Eli whispered, This is home now. The next morning arrived not with a bang, but a sigh, a golden one. A warm breath of sunlight filtered through the silk-paneled windows, catching in the soft threads of the woven curtains like tiny birds resting in a quiet tree. Aoi stirred in her futon, her limbs heavy with the sweetness of rest. For the first time in many weeks, her dreams had been gentle, a procession of pale plum blossoms drifting through indigo skies, and the sound of distant laughter that may have been her grandmother's. When she rose, the wooden floor beneath her feet was cool and smooth. She stepped softly, almost reverently, through the house, each footfall echoing faintly, as if the house itself still slept. Outside, she could hear the village already awakening, the low calls of vendors preparing for the early market, the murmur of elders greeting each other beneath the shade of lantern-strung awnings. But there was something different in the air, something tender and quietly alive. In the kitchen, Obasan was humming. Aoi paused by the doorway. Her grandmother was stirring something in a wide clay bowl, the motion slow and circular, as if she were painting time itself. On the counter lay bundles of golden-brown barley, their stalks tied with silken thread. "It's harvest morning," Obasan said softly, without turning. "The first harvest of the year." Aoi padded over, watching the barley sway as the breeze slipped in through the open shutters. "I thought harvest came later," she said. "For the big crops, yes," her grandmother replied. "But the barley in our field ripens early, always has. It dreams faster than the others." She chuckled quietly, and Aoi smiled, though she didn't quite understand. Obasan handed her a small, wrapped bundle. "For the shrine," she said. "You'll make the offering today. First time in 3 seasons." Aoi's eyes widened. The harvest offering? That was usually Obasan's role. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded, holding the bundle close. As she stepped outside, the morning light wrapped her in its golden shawl. Everything shimmered softly, the fields, the narrow paths, the delicate petals still clinging to the low plum trees near the stream. Insects buzzed lazily in the warmth. Somewhere a bamboo wind chime sang a slow, contented tune. She followed the path she had known since childhood, her fingers brushing the wildflowers that lined the edge. Each step brought back memories, not vivid, but like softened charcoal sketches. Her mother's laugh in the wind, the way her father's shadow once stretched long beside her in late summer evenings. And now, as she walked alone, the path felt fuller, not empty, but waiting. The shrine was small, barely more than a weathered gate and a stone platform nestled between 2 whispering cypress trees. Aoi knelt, unwrapped the bundle with care, and laid the barley at the shrine's center. She pressed her hands together, closed her eyes, and bowed. In her mind, she whispered not words, but feelings, gratitude, hope, and a quiet longing that even she couldn't name. When she looked up, she saw a white butterfly land gently on the barley. A breeze passed through the cypress trees, and for a brief moment, Aoi felt a warmth not from the sun, but from something deeper. The kind of warmth that settles behind your ribs and hums like a lullaby. That afternoon, the village square gathered like it hadn't in seasons. Mats were spread beneath the apricot trees, Small tables arranged with pickled plums, steamed rice cakes, and bowls of miso soup. Children chased each other through the grass, ribbons trailing behind them. The air smelled of roasted tea and something sweet, like yuzu and honey. Aoi helped Obasan arrange the barley cakes on a lacquered tray. Each one was carefully shaped and pressed with a tiny seal, the mark of their family, a crescent moon nested in a barley stalk. "They're softer than I remember," Aoi murmured. Obasan smiled. "Everything is when you return to it." As the sun dipped lower, people gathered around the fire pit, where a storyteller began his tale. He was a stooped old man with a voice like a cello string, deep and gentle, full of breath. He spoke of a fox who planted barley in a field no one wanted, and how, after many years, it bloomed gold even in snow. The villagers listened, eyes soft with memory, hands warming around cups of tea. And Aoi listened too, though she was only half hearing the words. She watched the fire flicker in her grandmother's eyes, and in the dancing light of the children who never seemed to tire. Later, as the first stars blinked into view and the square began to empty, Aoi wandered back to the field. The barley swayed in slow rhythm, almost like waves, their tips kissed by the moonlight. She sat by the edge, pulling her knees to her chest. The wind was softer now, quieter. It was then that she felt it again, that hum inside her, low and steady. The same feeling as in the shrine. And a thought came to her, not loud, not startling, just simple and true. This is home. Not because of the house. Not even because of the village. But because something in her had begun to root again, tentatively, like the barley, whispering. Stay. Grow. Dream. The morning came in hushes. No sunrise flared. No bold chorus of birds. Only a gentle tapping, 1,000 tiny fingers drumming on the paper windows, as if the sky were humming a lullaby just for Hanamori. The rain had come to stay for a while. Aoi sat by the window, her legs tucked under her, a cup of tea nestled in her palms. The steam rose slowly, curling toward the ceiling beams like slender ghosts. Outside, the garden had turned glassy, every leaf glistening, every stone dark and gleaming. The pond rippled faintly beneath the silver drizzle. She didn't mind the rain. In fact, she liked the way it quieted the world. It made everything seem closer, more intimate. As if even time itself paused to watch. Obasan was dozing nearby, wrapped in a blue shawl that had belonged to her own mother. Aoi could hear the soft rustle of her breath, slow and steady, like the tide brushing against the shore. There was something comforting in that rhythm, something eternal. Aoi turned her gaze back to the garden. Something about the rain made the memories come easier. Not loud, not demanding, just gentle nudges. She thought of her father again, how he used to light lanterns during rainy days and set them afloat on the stream, just to watch them drift slowly beneath the bridge. He said they carried messages to the sky. She murmured aloud, almost surprised at her own voice. Obasan stirred slightly, not quite waking. Aoi smiled and stood. She padded quietly to the back room and opened the old wooden chest. The scent that rose from it was thick with cedar and thyme. Inside, nestled between silk cloths and bundles of dried herbs, lay the lanterns, folded paper, soft and pale, edges slightly frayed. She lifted one out, then two, then three. By afternoon, the rain was lighter, no longer falling, but suspended, like a soft mist hanging in the trees. Aoi stood by the garden's edge, holding the first lantern gently in both hands. A spark from flint, a breath of warmth, and the flame caught. The lantern's skin glowed amber. She walked carefully down the stone path toward the stream that wound behind the house. The path was slick, the moss shining like jade, but her feet knew the way. At the water's edge she knelt. The stream was quiet, its surface interrupted only by the gentle plinks of occasional raindrops. She held the lantern close for a moment, whispering something into its light. A memory, maybe. Or a wish. Then she let it go. It floated softly, like a dream in no rush, the flame flickering with each ripple. She lit the second, then the third. Soon, 3 glowing petals were drifting down the stream, their reflections dancing in the rain-speckled surface. Aoi stayed for a long while, knees damp from the earth, watching them fade into the bend, into trees and fog. Back in the house, Obasan was awake, sipping tea with both hands curled around the cup like a prayer. "Did you send them?" she asked. Aoi nodded. "Just 3. Obasan smiled, her eyes a little wet, though whether from memory or the steam, Aoi couldn't tell. "Your father used to send 7. Every time. He said it was lucky. I'll do 7 next time," Aoi said softly. The rain had returned by evening, steady again, but not harsh. It made the whole village smell of wet pine and earth and cooked rice. That night, the streets of Hanamori shimmered beneath the rain. Lanterns, real and imagined, glowed from porches and under eaves. Some were red, some were gold, some faded from old paper. But all of them were lit. It was the festival of the listening moon. Aoi had forgotten it was this time of year, lost in the rhythm of the harvest and quiet days. But now, as the soft drum of the rain accompanied the faint sound of distant flutes, she remembered. People did not gather in crowds on this night. The listening moon was quiet, sacred. Families stayed close. They lit lanterns not for display, but for remembrance. For those who had left. For things once said. For voices that echoed faintly in the rain. Aoi stood beneath the porch awning, watching the village breathe in light. She thought of her parents again, not in the sharp way she had after they'd gone, but softly, like hearing their footsteps in the hallway after they'd passed, like the scent of her mother's soap on a borrowed scarf. Present, but not painful. Obasan joined her, carrying 2 bowls of hot sweet bean soup. "You remember what you told me when you were little?" she asked, handing Aoi the bowl. Aoi smiled faintly. "Which part?" "You said the rain was the sound of the moon listening." "I said that?" "You did," Obasan chuckled. "You were 5. I thought you were a poet." "Maybe I was." They stood together, eating slowly, watching the light play across the puddles. Later, Aoi couldn't sleep. Not for restlessness, but for peace. She got up and wrapped a shawl over her shoulders, barefoot and quiet, and crept to the back again. The chest still lay open, and the paper lanterns waited. She lit one more. Outside, the stream was fuller now. The lantern drifted quickly, its light swaying as the current carried it away. Aoi watched it until it disappeared completely. And then, just at the moment she turned to go, she heard it. Laughter. Not loud. Not near. But real. She froze. The air felt different, charged, but not heavy. The laughter came again, carried on the wind, light and familiar. She knew it. Somewhere deep in her chest, she knew it. "Otosan?" she whispered. Silence. Then another laugh. Softer this time. Almost amused. Then silence again. But Aoi didn't feel afraid. She knelt and pressed her hand to the earth. "Thank you," she whispered again. Rain fell lightly on her hair, on her shawl, on her bare arms. The moon, veiled in clouds, watched from above, and the lanterns whispered in the water. Not the heavy kind of stillness that weighs on the chest, but the light, fragile hush that comes after a long rain, when everything in the world seems to be holding its breath. The clouds had lifted in the night, and the sky was now pale and washed, like an old scroll. The air smelled of new beginnings, wet stone, pine needles, and something faintly sweet, like plum blossoms, though it was too early in the season. Aoi rose slowly, wrapping herself in the same indigo shawl she had worn the night before. Her hair was a little damp from the pillow, her cheeks still warm with sleep. But there was a feeling in her chest, a gentle, fluttering thing, that told her something had shifted. She stepped out into the garden barefoot. The moss welcomed her soles. The stones, still cool from the rain, reminded her she was real. She walked without hurry, breathing in the morning, feeling as though the garden itself had leaned in closer overnight. As she knelt beside the pond, she noticed something unusual, a single white feather, floating on the surface, spinning slowly. No birds had nested nearby in weeks. And yet there it was, soft, immaculate, turning in the reflection of the sky. Aoi reached out and touched it. It was dry and warm. She blinked. From behind her came the sound of wind, soft at first, then rising, as though it had remembered its own name. The trees stirred. The bamboo behind the house shivered in long waves. Aoi stood. The wind curled around her ankles, lifted her hair, tugged at her shawl, not with violence, but with intention. It was calling. That afternoon, Aoi visited the old hill. It lay at the edge of Hanamori, just beyond the rice paddies and the thicket of white-barked trees. Few went there anymore. The path had grown faint, grasses reclaiming what once was a proper trail. But Aoi remembered. She had walked here with her father once, long ago, when she was barely tall enough to see over the wildflowers. He had told her the wind remembered names. That if you spoke a name on this hill, the wind would carry it and deliver it to the sky, to the forest, to wherever it needed to go. She hadn't understood then. She wasn't sure she did now. But something in her bones told her it was time to return. When she reached the top, she stood quietly for a long while. The view was as she remembered, mist rolling gently through the trees, rooftops of the village nestled like sleeping cats in a blanket of pine. Somewhere a bell rang faintly, the shrine bell, perhaps, touched by the breeze. She closed her eyes. She whispered her father's name, then her mother's. Then one more, one she didn't expect. A name she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Rin. The wind came quickly then. It rushed across the hilltop, tousling her hair, tugging the shawl from her shoulders. She laughed, startled then stilled. The air buzzed with something more than sound. A presence. A memory that hadn't yet become a memory. Aoi sank to her knees and sat cross-legged on the grass. She didn't know how long she stayed there. The clouds moved slowly above. The grass bent and straightened. A cricket tried its chirp too early and quieted again. Eventually she rose. The wind had quieted, but her heart had not. That evening, back in the kitchen, Obasan was slicing daikon with careful, rhythmic strokes. The smell of miso and ginger hung in the air, curling into the beams like a song. "You went to the hill," she said without looking up. Aoi nodded. "I saw the feather," Obasan added. "You knew what it meant." "I hoped," the old woman murmured. "The wind doesn't bring feathers unless it wants something said." Aoi sat at the low table and watched the steam rise from the pot. "I said their names." "All of them?" A pause. "Yes," Aoi answered. Obasan smiled softly and ladled soup into 2 bowls. They heard. Aoi looked up. Obasan met her gaze, eyes full of things unsaid. "You feel it, don't you?" Aoi nodded. "Then that's enough." They ate in silence, the quiet kind that doesn't need filling. Outside, the wind stirred once more, just enough to rattle the wind chimes beneath the eaves. The soft metallic tones hung in the air like punctuation at the end of a sentence spoken long ago. That night Aoi dreamed. She was walking through a forest that shimmered with silver mist. The ground was soft beneath her feet, the trees tall and swaying gently. Lanterns hung from invisible threads, swaying like jellyfish in an unseen tide. She followed a path lined with feathers. Each one glowed faintly, pulsing in time with her breath. And then she saw him, her father, not as he was in his final days, but as she remembered him best, laughing, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hands stained with ink and earth. He smiled when he saw her. "You found the hill again," he said. "I did." He touched her cheek. "You remembered the wind." "I never forgot." They stood for a moment that seemed to stretch beyond sleep, beyond years. Then he turned, slowly fading into the light. She reached out, but her hand met only warmth. And when she woke, her cheek was wet with tears. In the morning, she walked to the edge of the village, where the old post tree stood, the one villagers used in olden times to hang messages to the wind. It was an ancient cedar, hollow in places, its bark worn smooth by weather and age. A little wooden shelf had been built beside it long ago, holding scraps of parchment, bits of charcoal, and twine. She hadn't used it in years. She took a slip of paper, wrote 3 names, tied it gently with a ribbon of pine thread, hung it on the hook. The breeze came softly. Then it carried the paper away, and the moment felt like something closing, or perhaps something beginning. In Hanamori, even the woods seemed to breathe. The house that Aoi returned to after the hill was not just a home. It was a keeper of warmth, of silences, of the things people said only once but hoped would never be forgotten. The floorboards sighed beneath her steps, not out of complaint, but recognition. The sliding doors knew the rhythm of her hands. The hearth, cold as it was, still held the echo of old firelight, and when Aoi stepped through the threshold, the house greeted her, not with words, but with the feeling of a blanket pulled over one's shoulders by someone who loves you, even after they are gone. She stood for a while in the entryway. There was a dust-mote stillness in the air. Light slanted through the shoji, catching on tiny particles like stars suspended in amber. The smell of pine, dried herbs, and worn tarame hung gently. Old scents, quiet scents, like a lullaby you only recognize halfway through. And then the sound came. Not loud, not sudden. A faint creak from the room at the end of the hall. Aoi turned her head. She had not stepped into that room since she arrived. The old study, her grandfather's favorite place. Her father's too once. After they were gone, the room had grown shy. Or perhaps she had. She slid the door open. The air inside was cooler, but not cold. It carried the scent of aged paper and cedarwood. Shelves lined the walls, overflowing with books, calligraphy scrolls, and strange little trinkets, rocks with holes in them, bits of string, feathers in jars. On the desk lay a single brush, still dipped in long-dried ink, and beside it, an empty page. Waiting. Aoi stepped inside and sat. The cushion beneath her had flattened with time but remembered her weight. She took a breath, then another, and slowly she began to write. At first, the words were stiff, like limbs not yet warmed by morning sun. She wrote a poem, a simple one, about wind through bamboo. Then another, about the way her grandmother poured tea. And then, unexpectedly, a memory surfaced of her mother humming while hanging laundry, her voice barely louder than the fluttering of the fabric. She wrote that down too, and something shifted. It was as if the room, the house itself, had exhaled. The light from the window brightened. A breeze stirred the corner of the scroll. And from outside came a gentle thok, a persimmon dropping to the ground, unnoticed until now. The house was listening. Later that day, Aoi ventured into the storage room behind the kitchen. Obasan had warned her it was dusty, disorganized, and full of things too old to be useful. But Aoi didn't go looking for usefulness. She went looking for memory. She slid open the door and coughed gently at the first breath of dust. The room was dark, save for a small square of sunlight spilling from a crack near the roof. Boxes stacked like miniature cities rose around her, some labeled, others mysterious. She opened the one nearest to her. Inside, old fans. Silk-covered, painted with faded scenes of cranes, mountains, chrysanthemums. She picked one up and unfolded it. A petal drifted out, paper-thin, pressed, still pink despite the years. Another box held inkstones, some still smelling faintly of soot. Another, a stack of handkerchiefs embroidered with tiny initials. AY, her mother's. And then, at the very back, she found a lacquer box, black with gold leaf curling at the edges. She hesitated before opening it. Inside were letters. Dozens. Written in her father's hand. Not addressed to anyone. Not even signed. Just pages. Observations. Moments. Small, careful paragraphs about the color of rice in early summer, the sound of rain on a specific Thursday, the way her mother twirled her hair when deep in thought. He had been writing to remember, not to publish, not to share, just to keep. Aoi closed the lid gently, and for the first time in many years she smiled through tears. That night she didn't dream in pictures. She dreamed in textures. The softness of worn futons, the crisp snap of starched collars on festival days, the slipperiness of plum skins, the scratch of rice paper beneath her brush. It was as though the house itself was dreaming with her, and when she woke, her fingers itched to write. In the days that followed, Aoi settled into a new rhythm. Mornings began with tea. Then she would walk the garden barefoot, pausing to speak to the koi, who had grown used to her presence and flicked their tails in recognition. Then came writing, first in the study, then sometimes in the garden, beneath the old apricot tree, or even on the veranda with a lap desk and a blanket. She wrote things she didn't even know she remembered. The smell of laundry soap from the alley behind the old bookstore in town. The way her father used to knock on the table twice before serving food. The way her grandmother always turned the teacup so the painted side faced the guest. She wasn't writing stories, exactly. She was writing presents. The kind of quiet noticing that held the past and present in one breath. And the house responded. The floorboards stopped creaking where they had creaked too much. The sliding doors moved more smoothly. The hearth began to carry warmth again, even before the fire was lit. One afternoon, Obasan found her in the study. "You've woken it," the old woman said gently. Aoi looked up. "The house?" Obasan nodded. "It's been waiting for someone to remember how." On the seventh day, a knock came at the gate. It was the old carpenter, Genji-san, carrying a bundle of straw and a quiet smile. He had heard, from someone, from nowhere, that the old house in Hanamori was stirring again. "They say walls remember kindness," he said, setting down his bundle. "I thought it might like new thatching before the rains return." And Aoi, surprised, welcomed him. Others followed. The potter's daughter brought tea bowls she had fired in secret, unsure if anyone still used them. The village children left small folded animals on the stone steps. A traveling monk passed by and, sensing something sacred, lit incense at the gate and bowed before continuing on. The house was not just remembered. It was being seen. That evening, as Aoi sat on the veranda with her notebook in her lap and a cup of yuzu tea at her side, she watched the light shift slowly across the stones. And she thought, this house remembers. Because someone once loved. And someone stayed. And now, perhaps, it was her turn to stay. The rain began as a whisper, a hush along the rooftops, a brushing against the leaves, a settling over the village so soft and constant that it blurred the edges of things, houses, voices, even time. In Hanamori, the first summer rain was not feared. It was welcomed. It came not to wash away, but to deepen. The greens grew greener. The wooden beams darkened and shone like polished stone. The koi swam slower, tracing secret spirals just beneath the surface of the pond. Aoi watched from the veranda, knees tucked beneath her, hands wrapped around a cup of roasted barley tea. The steam rose in a slow curl. She sipped without hurry. The warmth of the tea mirrored the warmth in her chest, quiet, present, unspoken. She had begun to sleep better. The nights no longer felt like echoes. They felt like rooms. Rooms she could step into and out of, guided by the gentle creaking of the floorboards, the rustle of the breeze through the paper screens, and sometimes the soft chirp of a frog in the flooded rice fields. It was on the third day of rain that the lanterns appeared. She saw them first at twilight. Faint glimmers moving along the edge of the field, near the narrow path that wound behind the shrine and disappeared into a grove of hinoki trees. At first she thought they were fireflies. Early, yes, but not impossible. But these lights did not flicker. They floated, round pale gold, like paper moons. 3 of them, moving slowly, one after another, as if following a rhythm only they could hear. Aoi stepped out into the rain without her umbrella. The water slid down her sleeves, soaked her socks. She didn't care. She followed the lights, barefoot, the earth soft beneath her. There was something in the air, not urgency, not fear, but invitation. By the time she reached the grove, the lanterns had stopped. They hovered just above the ground, gently swaying. And then she saw her, a girl, younger than Aoi, perhaps 12 or 13, dressed in a faded green yukata. Her black hair was tied back with twine. Her face was pale, but not ghostly, more like mist, soft around the edges, hard to focus on. The girl bowed, not deeply, just enough to acknowledge. Then she turned and walked into the grove. Aoi hesitated only for a moment, and then she followed. The path was familiar. She had walked here as a child, clutching her grandmother's hand, listening to the old woman hum songs about the rain fox and the stone crane. The trees here were old. They arched overhead like guardians, filtering the rain into silver threads. As they walked, more lanterns appeared. Dozens. Some hung from branches. Some floated along the path. Some sat atop mossy stones as if they had always been there. The girl said nothing, but she didn't need to. Aoi could feel it. This was not a dream, and not quite the waking world either. It was something in between. A soft place. A remembering place. Finally, they arrived. A clearing. Small. Circular. At its center, a round pond, fed by a trickle of rainwater. Around it, stones carved with names. Some names were clear. Some had faded. Some were written in characters Aoi did not know, ancient ones, curving and looping like vines. The girl turned to her and gestured to the edge of the pond. A bench, a cushion, a brush and inkstone. Aoi sat, and she understood. She picked up the brush, ground the ink slowly. The scent was sharp and grounding. She dipped, paused, and began to write, not words, but feelings. Shapes. Images. She wrote the sound of rain on her father's umbrella. The taste of plum syrup on summer evenings. The weight of her mother's hair in her lap when she combed it before bed. Each stroke of the brush felt like placing something into the earth, not to bury it, but to let it grow again. When she was done, she placed the paper on a flat stone beside the pond, and the rain stopped. Just like that. As if it, too, had been waiting. The girl smiled. Her eyes shimmered like the wet stones. Then she turned and began to fade. Not all at once. Not like smoke. More like a memory that's been said aloud and then slips gently back into silence. Aoi remained in the clearing until the stars came out. When she finally rose, her feet were dry, her heart lighter. She walked home under a sky as soft as breath. The lanterns lit her way. Back in the house, she found something waiting. A letter. Not posted. Not placed by any known hand. Folded neatly on the low table where she always set her tea. She opened it. Just one line. The house is only half the memory. The rest is yours to give. There was no signature, but the ink still smelled faintly of hinoki. In the days that followed, the rain returned, gentle, rhythmic, steady. A lullaby for the village. Aoi wrote each morning now. And each evening, she lit one small lantern, placed it by the window, and whispered into it, not wishes, not prayers, but fragments of memory. A single note of her grandmother's song. The crease in her father's smile when he thought no one was watching. The story her mother once told about a fox who fell in love with the moon. The lanterns didn't rise. They didn't float. But the light they gave was enough. Enough to see by. Enough to remember. Enough to become. Soft, milky, almost sweet in the way it draped itself over the rooftops and curled around the bases of the trees. It did not hide the world. It revealed a slower version of it, one where every movement felt intentional, where even a leaf drifting to the ground seemed to take its time. Aoi sat on the tatami mat in the tea room, alone, though she didn't feel alone. The room was quiet, but not silent. There was the faint rustle of bamboo in the courtyard, the distant call of a warbler, the almost inaudible ticking of the old clock by the door, its hands moving so gently they might have been breathing. And then, most importantly, there was the sound of tea being poured. It was her favorite sound in the world. Not the kettle's whistle, though she liked that too. Not the clink of porcelain lids or the soft brushing of a tea whisk. Just the moment when the tea left the spout and filled the waiting cup. That soft, round, watery glissando, like the sigh of a small river leaning in to tell a secret. She poured for herself. Not as her grandmother once had, with formal movements and ceremonial pauses, but slowly, quietly, with care. The steam rose. The scent of roasted brown rice and mountain herbs filled the air, gentle and grounding. She held the cup with both hands, drank, and time softened around her. It had been 5 weeks since the lanterns, 5 weeks since the rain girl and the quiet grove, 5 weeks since the letter that had said, "The house is only half the memory. The rest is yours to give." At first, she didn't know what that meant. But gradually, as she moved through the days, opening old drawers, running her fingers over her grandmother's weathered calligraphy tools, sitting at the threshold each evening to watch the bats rise, she began to feel it. The house was not waiting for her to remember it. It was waiting to remember with her. She began to host tea again, quietly, one guest at a time. No invitations, just visits. A soft knock at the gate. A familiar pair of sandals left near the door. The smell of damp umbrellas and the fresh tang of rain on sleeves. They came as they always had, not for advice or spectacle, but for presence, for the space between words, for the sound of tea being poured. First came Mr. Takeda, the old carpenter with hands like driftwood. He had helped fix a broken shoji screen when she was 7, and still called her Keo-chan, though she was now well past 30. He said nothing as she poured, just looked around the room with a faraway gaze and smiled to himself. When he finally spoke, it was only to say, "Your grandmother always kept her teacups in the same order. Left to right, spring to winter." Aoi smiled. After he left, she rearranged the cups. Then came Mayumi, who once sold persimmons in the morning market and had cheeks like red apples even now. She brought a bundle of dried citrus peels wrapped in linen. "This is for scent," she whispered. "Hang it near the window. Your grandmother used to." They sat in silence for nearly an hour. The only sounds were the chirping of the evening frogs and the tea being poured. When Mayumi left, she bowed deeply, eyes glistening. Not from sadness, from peace. Each visit brought a thread. A memory not her own, but one she was now part of. The man who came just to see the plum tree her grandmother had planted. The child who remembered being given a steamed sweet on a rainy day, sitting on a cushion that smelled of cedar. Even the mailman paused longer at her gate now, offering her small nods and weather observations in tones that felt like folded paper, soft, precise, carried with care. She listened. She poured. And the house filled, not with noise but with presence. One morning, a package arrived. No name. Just a bundle wrapped in indigo cloth. Inside, a porcelain teapot, pale celadon, shaped like a curled gourd. Delicate, but strong. And a note. "She once gave me tea in this. I wanted to return home." Aoi held it in her hands for a long time. The weight of it. The silence inside it. The memory that someone, somewhere, had carried all this time. That night, she dreamed of the sound again. The tea pouring. Endlessly. Into cups that had no bottom. And when she woke, the air smelled of yuzu and cedar. She began to write small notes. Nothing grand. Just folded sheets of washi, placed in corners. In the drawer beside the teacups. This is where she hid her best blend. For special guests. on the shelf with the fans. The one with the blue cranes was hers. She used it when she was nervous, on the back of the rice scoop. Her laugh once echoed from here. She wasn't labeling objects. She was planting memory, not for others, for the house itself. So that when she was old, when her own hands trembled, when her own memory became porous, there would be something here that remembered for her. One rainy evening, just as the light was fading, she poured tea for herself and someone who was not there. A second cup, placed gently on the table, and as the tea fell into it, she heard the softest sound. Not from the kettle, not from the cup, from the air. A breath, a whisper, and she smiled. Outside, the mist rose again, wrapping Hanamori in layers of cloud and memory. Inside, the room was lit only by the glow of the kettle and the flicker of a single lantern. Aoi sipped her tea. It was warm. It was bitter. It was real. And in that moment, it was enough. Some mornings in Hanamori felt like they had been borrowed from a dream. The air shimmered faintly, like the world was remembering something. On such a morning, Aoi heard the sparrow again. Not just any sparrow. That sparrow. The one who had nested, year after year, in the crooked space beneath the eaves. The one who chirped as though it was telling jokes only it understood. It had been there when she was a child, fluttering, chirping, vanishing into the clouds, and now, more than 2 decades later, she still heard it. The same lilt, the same rhythm. She had long since named it. Kamami. Little bean. She had no proof it was the same bird. It was likely generations of sparrows, each learning the songs of the last. But there was something in the sound, something mischievous and comforting, that made her believe. It was the kind of belief that didn't need facts. Like believing in the kindness of rain, or the patience of stones. Aoi was sweeping the veranda when Kamami landed just inches from her sandal. He puffed up, made a tight circle on the wood, then tilted his head at her. "You're bold this morning," Aoi murmured. He chirped. She leaned the broom against the wall and crouched. "Still hungry?" She picked a few toasted rice grains from the pocket of her apron and gently placed them on the wood. Kamami hopped once. Looked. Hopped again. Peeped sharply, as if inspecting their freshness. Then he pecked at them, fluffed his feathers triumphantly, and flew off, not far, just to the low branch of the apricot tree. Watching her. Always watching. Her grandmother used to say, "There is one sparrow in this world who is watching over you. He never flies far." When Aoi was 7, she had believed it meant Kamami was a spirit guide. When she was 15, she decided it was just a saying. And now, at 33, she wasn't sure anymore. But that morning, she decided to follow him. He darted from the apricot tree to the fence post. From the fence post to the narrow garden gate. From the gate to the old shrine path, his wings flashing in and out of sunlight. She followed slowly. The path was familiar, stone steps fringed with moss, tiny wildflowers curling along the edges, and yet it felt like she was walking it for the first time. Everything was quieter here. Even the wind whispered. She passed the weathered torii gate, half swallowed by ivy, and paused to bow. The air was thick with that soft, still kind of silence that seems to hum rather than hush. Kamami landed on the roof beam of the shrine and disappeared. Aoi stepped into the clearing and gasped. The shrine was small, barely larger than a garden shed. But it was beautiful. The way only things left in peace for decades can be. Worn but proud. The wooden offering box was dusty. The bell rope frayed. But when she looked closer, she saw something that made her breath still. A tiny bowl, set neatly on the step. Inside it, 3 polished rice grains. Fresh. Someone had been here. Recently. She looked around, but the forest said nothing. Only a breeze passed, shaking a few leaves loose, which fell in lazy spirals. That evening, Aoi returned to the house, quiet and thoughtful. She made herself tea, barley this time, and sipped slowly, eyes fixed on the dust-colored sky. Kamami was back on the fence post, cleaning his feathers as if nothing unusual had happened. "Who leaves you offerings?" she whispered. He chirped once, then flew to the porch and landed near her teacup. Without thinking, she poured a few drops of tea into the saucer and slid it toward him. He sipped, daintily, if such a word could be used for a bird, and then nestled down beside the cup, content. That night she dreamed of feathers. Soft, weightless feathers falling like petals, and a girl with sparrow eyes sitting at the shrine steps, whispering stories to the wind. In the following days, Aoi returned to the shrine again, and again. Each time, she found something new. A small pebble, painted with a red dot. A paper crane folded from a train ticket. A note, written in crooked hiragana. "Thank you for the rain. Someone came here to pray. Not loudly. Not with incense or great ceremony. But with presence. And with offerings meant not for gods, but for the space itself." On the 6th visit, Aoi brought her own gift. A tiny porcelain sparrow. It had belonged to her grandmother, kept on the highest shelf, behind the tea canisters. She placed it carefully next to the offering bowl and whispered, "May you never fly alone." Back at home, Kamami sat on the windowsill that evening, tapping the glass gently. She opened it. He flew to the table, turned a small circle, then hopped onto the cushion where her grandmother once sat. She laughed softly. "You're not shy anymore." He chirped twice, sharp, decisive, and then flew out again. In the weeks that followed, more signs appeared at the shrine. A tiny wooden bead, a dried wisteria petal, half a biscuit wrapped in tissue, and one day, a name, written in charcoal on a flat stone. Kina. Aoi stared at it a long time. The name felt familiar, though she couldn't place it. Then, one evening while flipping through an old photo album, she found her. A girl with big eyes and pigtails, sitting next to her at age 9. Kina. She had moved away suddenly, her family vanishing after a season of bad storms. They'd lost touch. But here, somehow, she'd returned. Aoi left her a note, folded gently. "I remember you." She returned the next day. It was gone, and in its place a new offering. A single pressed daisy, bound with golden thread. One evening, when the tea had just finished steeping and the air smelled of roasted barley and mountain rain, Kamami did something unexpected. He flew into the house. Not just to the windowsill, not to the veranda. Inside. He circled the room once, twice, and then landed, lightly, on the edge of her grandmother's chair. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Kamami looked at her, really looked, then chirped a sound so clear and familiar it made her eyes sting. Ko, her childhood name. Aoi lowered her head, and for the first time since her grandmother passed, she cried. Not out of sadness, but relief. Because she finally understood. This house wasn't haunted by memory. It was held by it. Kamami had never left. Neither had her grandmother. Neither had Kina. Or the wind. Or the sound of tea pouring. They had all become part of the silence. Part of the slow breath of Hanamori. And as she sat there, the sparrow flew once more, not away, but in circles above her, wings slicing the golden light, each beat like a page turning. Outside, dusk settled like a blanket over the mountains. Inside, the air was still, and in that stillness Aoi smiled, because she knew. There are some things that never truly leave. Not birds, not people, not stories, not love. It had been raining all night. Not in torrents, not with thunder, but with a soft, insistent rhythm, as though the sky were whispering to the earth stories too old for speech. When Aoi slid open the shoji in the morning, the world outside shimmered in silver gray. The garden was wet with dew and memory. Drops clung to every blade of grass, every leaf, every slat of the bamboo fence that bordered the path to the back grove. There, beyond the hydrangeas and stone lantern, stood the old bamboo forest, small by most standards, but sacred in its quiet persistence. Her grandfather had once called it aim-take, rain bamboo. He claimed that these stalks could remember the shape of every rainfall they had lived through. Listen to them when the wind passes, he'd say. They creak in the language of memory. She hadn't believed him as a child. Bamboo was just bamboo. Tall, green, swaying in the wind. But now, in her 30s, alone in the inherited house with the sighing floors and warm eaves, she often found herself drawn to that grove when the rain came. She took a deep breath, put on her old garden shoes, and stepped onto the path. The mud squelched softly beneath her soles. Her umbrella was unnecessary. The rain had slowed to a mist. The kind that didn't fall so much as float. The bamboo grove stood as it always had, tall, lean, and possibly green against the gray light. The stalks reached upward as though asking the sky to remember them. She stepped beneath the canopy. The sound changed. In the grove, everything grew quieter, softer. Each droplet that slid from a leaf to the earth did so with purpose. The bamboo creaked slightly in the breeze, not groaning, not whining, just gently adjusting themselves, like elderly neighbors shifting in their chairs to look out the window. The smell of wet earth, of moss and old bark, filled her lungs. She walked to the small clearing at the heart of the grove, where an old stone bench stood. It was cracked down the middle, a crack she remembered tracing with her fingers as a child. She sat now, letting the damp seep through her skirt. Kamami appeared a moment later, flitting from stalk to stalk before settling on the bench beside her. He chirped once, then began preening his feathers with great concentration. "Do you remember this place?" she asked softly, as if expecting him to answer. "We used to come here with her. Grandmother would hum that same tune, the one with no words." Her voice trailed off. The breeze rose just slightly, and the bamboo answered, not with speech, but with a gentle wave of motion, a low wooden creak that seemed to sigh along with her. In her memory, her grandmother's laughter echoed here. Not loudly, she was never loud, but in that way where joy didn't need to raise its voice to be felt. Aoi closed her eyes and let the sensation of the grove hold her, the dampness of moss, the gentle give of earth, the tickle of a single drop sliding down the back of her neck. She imagined the bamboo pressing close, like guardians, like quiet friends with long memories and green fingers. She reached into her sleeve and pulled out a strip of tanzaku, soft paper used during Tanabata for writing wishes. She hadn't written anything on it yet, just brought it with her, out of instinct. She had no wish to make, or perhaps too many. Her grandmother used to say that the bamboo understood wishes even before they were written, that the act of tying the paper was enough. So she stood, moved to the nearest stalk, and gently tied the blank tanzaku to a low branch. It fluttered slightly, catching the mist light like a whisper. And in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't a sound, not quite, nor a breeze. More like a remembering, not hers, but the grove's. The bamboo swayed, though the air was still. The leaves rustled, though no wind passed. The world seemed to hush. She stood there for what felt like a long time, heart quiet, eyes soft. Kamami chirped once more, then flew into the upper branches, disappearing into the green. Aoi smiled. As she walked back home, the rain began again, just softly, as if the sky had paused to listen, then continued its story. Behind her, the bamboo creaked once more, and she could almost swear it sounded like a sigh of thanks. The lantern had not been lit in years. It stood quietly at the corner of the garden, half hidden by a hedge of camellias and a now wild patch of lemon balm. Made of stone, it leaned slightly to the left, just enough to suggest time had nudged it there, gently but persistently. Moss curled around its base like a sleeping cat. A crack ran down its back, almost delicate, as though even its wear had been shaped with care. Aoi had walked past it countless times. As a child, she had placed fireflies inside and watched them pulse softly behind the carved lattice. As a teenager, she had ignored it, considering it just another piece of the old garden's stubborn memory. But now, in her slow, solitary days in Hanamori, the lantern began to whisper again, not in sound, but in presence. Each time she passed it, she felt the weight of its waiting. Not urgent, not expectant, just steady, patient, as though it remembered a promise made long ago and never once questioned whether it would be kept. One evening, after a long and gentle day of tending to the kitchen, Aoi stepped outside with a cup of barley tea and felt the hush of the air. The sun had dipped low. The sky, a deepening blue, held the kind of stillness that asks not to be interrupted. Kamami fluttered nearby, hopping from the edge of the veranda to the smooth stone of the garden basin. Aoi sat and watched the sky grow darker, the silhouettes of trees growing more profound against the dusk. She sipped her tea slowly, and her eyes wandered to the stone lantern. It stood, as always, in its lean and silence. But something in her stirred. A memory, no, more like a longing, surfaced. Her grandmother used to light that lantern only on nights of full moon. A moon should never rise without someone waiting for it, she had once said, tucking Aoi into a summer futon. And a lantern should never forget how to glow. That night, the moon was rising, large, soft, round. Its edge peaked above the low ridge to the east, casting a pale luminescence over the trees. Aoi stood slowly, returned to the kitchen, and pulled open a small drawer beneath the tea cupboard. There, wrapped in an old handkerchief, lay a bundle of thin, waxed candles. She hadn't touched them in years. Her hands moved without thought. Outside again, she brushed the moss gently from the lantern's niche, placed a candle inside, and struck a match. The flame sputtered at first, then steadied. It cast a faint glow through the carved window, not bright, but enough. A small offering of light to the world. The effect was immediate and strange. The garden seemed to lean in, just slightly. The camellia leaves shimmered with a silver edge. Kamami let out a soft trill and perched on the fence, unusually still. Aoi sat again, cross-legged this time, and let her gaze settle on the flame. It flickered once, twice, then burned steadily, as though remembering its purpose. Her grandmother had once said that some lanterns are not meant to banish darkness, but to teach us how to sit within it. That warmth, even the quietest kind, has a way of finding us when the night grows too vast. For a long time, Aoi said nothing. She simply watched. The moon rose higher. The garden shimmered with quiet grace. And the lantern glowed on, remembering. Later that night, as she prepared to sleep, Aoi left the sliding door open just a crack. Enough to let the scent of camellia in. Enough to glimpse the flicker of that ancient flame still alive in the night. She lay on her futon and listened, not for sound, but for presence. For memory. For moonlight that had, at last, been welcomed home. The persimmon tree stood just beyond the back gate, its branches heavy with fruit still ripening under the late autumn sun. The leaves were turning gold and fiery orange, catching the light like small flames trembling in the breeze. Aoi often found herself drawn to that tree in the afternoons, when the air was cool and soft, and the world felt as if it were holding its breath. This particular day was no different. She had come to rest on the wooden bench beneath the spreading branches, the same bench her grandmother had once placed there to watch the garden grow. The bench was worn smooth by time and countless afternoons of quiet contemplation. Kamami fluttered from branch to branch, chirping softly, his tiny presence comforting. Aoi held a cup of warm tea, the steam rising slowly in the crisp air. She breathed in the scent of earth and drying leaves, feeling the gentle pulse of the season moving forward. As she sipped, she noticed a movement beneath the tree, a small figure, almost hidden by the dappled shadows. It was a young man, perhaps no older than herself, with eyes that seemed to carry a quiet sorrow. He looked up, startled to find her watching. For a moment neither spoke. Then he smiled, a hesitant, almost shy gesture. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said softly, his voice carrying the gentleness of the wind. "I've been wandering for days, looking for something I can't name." Aoi's heart stirred with a quiet recognition. There was something familiar in his gaze, a reflection of the same restless searching she had felt in her own soul. "Sit with me," she offered without hesitation, patting the bench beside her. The man accepted, settling down with a sigh of relief. They shared silence at first, the kind that doesn't feel empty but full of unspoken understanding. Around them, the persimmon leaves whispered secrets as the breeze passed through. Kamini hopped closer, perching on the man's knee, and he smiled again, this time more genuinely. "What brings you here?" Aoi finally asked, her voice a whisper. "I don't know," he admitted. "I think I was running from a past I can't change, and a future I'm afraid to face. But in this place, something feels different, like I can breathe again." Aoi nodded, understanding deeper than words. She looked up at the golden canopy, where sunlight filtered through, casting shifting patterns on the ground. "This garden has a way of healing," she said quietly, "of holding memories, and sometimes giving us the space to start anew." The man smiled, eyes softening. "Thank you for letting me rest here." They sat together as the afternoon waned, the persimmon tree bearing witness to the quiet meeting of two wandering souls. The fruit above glowed like lanterns in the fading light, promising sweetness even after seasons of waiting. And in that shared stillness, Aoi felt a gentle hope take root, a feeling that, perhaps, no one is ever truly lost, so long as they find a place to call home, even if only for a moment. Winter came softly that year, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace that had settled over Hanamori. One morning, Aoi awoke to a world transformed, white and still, blanketed in fresh snow that muffled every sound and softened every shape. The garden, the bamboo grove, even the old stone lantern wore coats of glittering frost, delicate and perfect. She stepped outside, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. The snow crunched faintly beneath her shoes, a crisp, clean sound that echoed in the quiet. Kamini fluttered nervously around her head, his feathers fluffed against the chill, before settling on her shoulder like a warm promise. Aoi's gaze drifted upward to the sky, a pale, endless expanse that seemed both infinite and intimate. She wrapped her scarf tighter and walked toward the bamboo grove, where the stalks stood like white-clad sentinels, their usual green replaced by icy glaze. The bamboo creaked softly in the gentle breeze, a sound both ancient and tender, as if whispering a song only winter could carry. In the heart of the grove, where the snow had gathered thickest, lay a single red scarf, her grandmother's scarf, she realized with a sudden rush of memory. It was caught on a low branch, vibrant against the snow's purity. She reached out carefully, brushing the snow away before retrieving it, the fabric warm despite the cold. Wrapping it around her neck, Aoi closed her eyes and let the quiet song of snow fill her senses. It was a song of endings and beginnings, of rest and renewal, carried on the soft wind that danced through the bamboo. It spoke of time passing gently, like snowfall settling without haste, covering the old and promising the new. For a long while she stayed there, letting the cold seep into her bones and the silence fill her heart. The world was hushed, but it was alive, with memory, with hope, with the quiet music of a winter's breath. When she finally turned to leave, the sky was already fading to twilight. Kamami chirped softly, fluttering to her hand. Together they walked back to the warm light of the house, carrying with them the peace that only a silent snowfall can bring. Spring whispered its arrival gently, as if not to wake the world too abruptly from its winter slumber. The first blossoms of plum trees appeared, pale pink and white, delicate as a sigh against the soft blue sky. Aoi stepped into the garden, feeling the subtle shift in the air, a promise woven in every breeze, every budding leaf. The garden was stirring back to life. Beneath the snow-melted earth, roots reached quietly, leaves unfurled slowly, and the scent of damp soil mingled with the soft fragrance of blooming plum. Kamami hopped excitedly from branch to branch, his chirps bright and lively like the returning song of spring itself. Aoi's eyes fell on the old stone lantern, now clear of moss and snow, standing steady in its corner. She approached it with reverence, as though greeting an old friend who had waited patiently through the seasons. Around the lantern, crocuses and daffodils peeked shyly through the softened ground, bursts of color that seemed to smile at the warmth of the sun. Kneeling down, Aoi touched the petals lightly. The blooms felt fragile but alive, a quiet celebration of survival and hope. Her grandmother's words came to her again. The first blossom carries a promise that no matter how cold the night, the sun will rise again. In that moment, Aoi felt a new beginning settle in her chest. The past's weight, the loneliness of winter, the silent waiting of the lantern, all were threads woven into a tapestry now glowing with possibility. She rose, breath deep and steady, and looked up at the sky where the sun shone warmly, casting long, gentle shadows. The garden was awake again. So was she. The wind began as a gentle sigh, barely stirring the new leaves of the plum trees. It carried with it the sense of earth and rain, the promise of distant mountains waking from their winter sleep. Aoi stood at the edge of the garden, feeling the breeze wrap softly around her like a familiar embrace, as if the wind itself remembered her name. Kamami fluttered excitedly, chasing invisible currents, his small body darting through shafts of sunlight that danced between the branches. Aoi closed her eyes and tilted her face toward the sky, listening, not to words, but to the language of the wind, a silent song that whispered through bamboo leaves and carried stories from faraway places. The wind spoke of journeys taken and those yet to come, of seeds carried on its breath and dreams born beneath open skies. It reminded Aoi of her own quiet longing, to explore beyond the garden, to find new stories waiting beyond the hills of Hanamori. Yet, in that moment, standing rooted in the soil of her childhood home, she understood something deeper. The wind does not choose one path but travels all at once, weaving together every place it touches. Like the wind, she could carry the past and the future within her, moving freely between memory and hope. A soft laugh escaped her lips, light and unburdened. Kamami landed on her shoulder, his warmth grounding her in the present. Together they watched as the petals of the plum blossoms drifted down, swirling in the breeze like gentle snowflakes. The garden whispered back, and the wind carried their shared secret, a promise that no matter where the journey led, the heart could always find its way home. As spring deepened, the garden began to transform in ways both visible and unseen. Every morning, Aoi would wander beneath the arching branches of the plum and cherry trees, where petals drifted like soft rain, carpeting the ground in shades of pale pink and white. The air was thick with the scent of blossoms and the subtle hum of life returning, filling every corner with a gentle vibrancy. Near the edge of the garden, a narrow wooden bridge arched quietly over a shallow stream, a place her grandmother had often spoken of as the Bridge of Quiet Steps. It was simple in its construction, weathered by years of rain and sun, but sturdy and graceful, as if it had grown naturally from the earth itself. Aoi loved to sit there, letting her feet dangle just above the water's surface, watching as tiny fish darted beneath the ripples and dragonflies skimmed over the glassy surface. The bridge was a threshold, a space between worlds, one foot in the safety of the garden's embrace, the other poised toward the wild unknown beyond. On this particular afternoon, the sunlight filtered through fresh green leaves, creating patterns that danced across the wooden planks. The breeze was warmer now, carrying with it the soft calls of birds returning from distant places. Kamami perched beside her, his small eyes alert and shining. Aoi traced the grain of the wood beneath her fingers, feeling the smoothness shaped by countless quiet footsteps, those of children who had played here long ago, of lovers who had whispered promises beneath the stars, of travelers who had paused to rest and listen to the river's song. She thought of the visitor beneath the persimmon tree, the young man who had found refuge here in the gentle silence, and wondered if, perhaps, the garden was more than just a place of memory. Maybe it was a sanctuary, a quiet bridge connecting hearts, stories, and dreams. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows and bathing the world in a golden glow. Aoi stood, brushing a stray petal from her hair, and felt a surge of calm determination rise within her. The garden had taught her to wait patiently, to embrace change with grace, and to find strength in stillness. With one last look at the sparkling stream below, she stepped off the bridge and turned toward the path leading home. The future was still unwritten, a soft mystery unfolding step by step. And though she could not see all that lay ahead, she knew she would carry the quiet strength of this place with her, like a lantern lit in the heart of night, steady and true. As the days grew longer and the air warmer, the village began to prepare for the annual Lantern Festival, a celebration woven from threads of tradition, memory, and hope. The festival was more than just a gathering. It was a time when the past and present met in the soft glow of paper lanterns, their light flickering like stars caught in the night sky. Aoi found herself drawn into the preparations, her hands busy folding delicate rice paper and carefully painting gentle patterns of blossoms and waves. The scent of incense and fresh blossoms mingled with the murmur of voices, laughter, and distant music. The entire village seemed to pulse with quiet excitement, as if the lanterns would carry more than just light. They would carry dreams. As dusk fell, Aoi walked through the narrow streets, now lined with lanterns swaying gently in the evening breeze. Their warm glow illuminated faces young and old, reflecting a shared sense of wonder and belonging. Kamami fluttered above her head, his feathers catching the soft light as he trailed behind like a small, living flame. By the riverbank, families gathered to release their lanterns onto the water, sending them drifting slowly downstream. Each lantern held a wish, a memory, a hope whispered into the night. Aoi lit her own lantern, feeling the fragile paper warm beneath her fingers, and closed her eyes. She thought of her grandmother, of the stories told beneath this same sky, and of the visitor who had found refuge beneath the persimmon tree. She thought of the garden, the bridge, the quiet strength that had grown within her. And as she set the lantern afloat, she whispered a wish not just for herself, but for all the wandering souls seeking light in the darkness. The lanterns floated gently, their reflections shimmering like constellations on the water's surface. The night was alive with soft music, the echo of flutes, the steady beat of drums, and the quiet hum of hearts united in hope. Aoi stayed by the river long after the last lantern had drifted out of sight, feeling the peace of the moment settle deep within her. The festival was a bridge of light, connecting those who had gone before with those yet to come, a reminder that even in the darkest nights, a single flame could illuminate the path forward. And beneath the vast, starlit sky, she knew the journey was far from over. But for now, the echoes of the Lantern Festival sang a song of home, of healing, and of endless possibility. The night after the Lantern Festival, Hanamori was wrapped in a blanket of quiet moonlight. The village lay peaceful, its streets softened by shadows and silver glow. Aoi stepped outside her home, drawn by the serene stillness that followed the celebration, feeling the cool night air brush gently against her skin. The garden, too, seemed to hold its breath beneath the pale light. The bamboo leaves shimmered faintly, casting delicate patterns on the ground like the brushstrokes of a patient painter. The stone lantern, steadfast and familiar, stood as a silent guardian amid the soft rustle of the night breeze. Aoi walked slowly toward the garden, her steps light, as if not to disturb the fragile magic of the hour. Kamami fluttered quietly beside her, his tiny form almost a shadow against the silver leaves. Together they moved deeper into the embrace of the bamboo grove, where the air smelled of earth and whispered secrets. She found her usual spot beneath the persimmon tree, now bare but strong, its branches reaching toward the moon as if in silent prayer. Sitting down, Aoi let her fingers trace the cool bark, grounding herself in the familiar texture. The moon hung low and luminous, a perfect silver orb casting its gentle light across the landscape. As she gazed upward, memories of the festival's lanterns drifting on the river came flooding back, soft lights like scattered stars, each carrying a wish, a hope, a silent prayer. The moon seemed to respond, its glow wrapping around her like a comforting embrace, a reminder that even in solitude, she was never truly alone. The night deepened, and with it, A quiet understanding settled in her heart. Life was a tapestry of light and shadow, of endings and beginnings, woven with threads both seen and unseen. Like the lanterns in the moonlight, she was part of a greater story, one that stretched beyond the garden, beyond the village, beyond even the boundaries of time. Aoi closed her eyes and breathed deeply, the cool night filling her lungs, steadying her spirit. The future remained a mystery, its path unseen, but beneath the quiet moonlight she found strength. Strength to face the unknown, to carry forward the light passed down through generations, and to walk her own path, quietly, steadily, with hope. When she rose to leave, Kamami perched on her shoulder, a warm presence in the cool night. Together they returned home, the moonlight guiding their way, a silent promise shining softly in the dark. The sun rose slowly, casting warm golden rays over the village. Spring was gently yielding to summer, and the air was filled with the fresh scent of grass and blooming gardens. Aoi woke early, sensing that this day held something important, something quietly beginning to grow within her heart. She stepped outside into the soft morning light, the gentle murmur of the nearby stream accompanying her steps as she walked toward her garden. The earth was soft and damp from the night's rain, sparkling with tiny droplets like countless diamonds. Beneath her feet, something faintly crunched, the first shoots of wheat pushing through the soil for the very first time this year. Aoi knelt down and touched the green sprouts trembling in the breeze. She thought about how these small shoots symbolized not only hope but also responsibility for the earth, for life, for the future. In that understanding, she felt a quiet strength, a gentle current connecting generations past and those yet to come. At that moment, Kamami appeared, hopping joyfully onto her lap as if sharing her quiet joy and peace. Aoi smiled, stroking his soft feathers, and reflected on the many journeys still awaiting her. She knew that like these seeds, her own life would grow and bloom, sometimes under the sun, sometimes under the rain, but always moving forward. With each passing day, she was becoming stronger, wiser, ready to embrace both joy and challenge. Raising her eyes to the sky now shining a clear blue, Aoi felt it was time to take the first step into a new adventure. The future was unknown, but she held in her hands a tiny seed of hope, and that was all she needed. The days grew warmer, and the gentle hum of summer filled the air. Aoi wandered through the fields beyond the village, where tall grasses swayed like waves beneath the open sky. The breeze carried soft whispers, voices of the past mingling with the present, weaving stories only the wind could tell. She paused on a small hill overlooking the valley, the world stretching out in every direction like a living tapestry. The golden light of late afternoon painted everything in hues of amber and honey. Kamami fluttered nearby, his tiny wings catching the light like a flicker of flame. Closing her eyes, Aoi let the wind wrap around her, carrying memories and hopes alike. She thought of her grandmother's gentle voice, the garden's quiet strength, the lanterns drifting on the river, and the first green shoots pushing through the soil. All of these threads were part of her, woven together like a soft melody. In that moment, she understood something new. Life was not a straight path, but a dance, a weaving of moments, choices, and dreams. Sometimes the wind would guide her, sometimes she would choose her own way, but she would always carry these whispers within her. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, Aoi opened her eyes and smiled softly. The journey ahead was uncertain, but the wind's song gave her courage. She would walk forward with an open heart, ready to listen, learn, and grow. The sky deepened into twilight, stars beginning to peek out like distant lanterns. And beneath that vast, endless canopy, Aoi and Kamami turned toward home, their steps light, their spirits quietly strong. The morning light filtered softly through the bamboo grove, casting dappled shadows across the garden path. Aoi moved quietly, her fingers brushing over the leaves and petals as if greeting old friends. The garden was alive with subtle sounds, the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant chirping of birds, and the faint hum of bees visiting blossoms heavy with nectar. Today, she felt a stirring deep within her, a curiosity mixed with a quiet anticipation. There was a place she had yet to explore fully, a secret corner of the garden that her grandmother had once spoken of in hushed tones. It was said to hold the heart of the garden's magic, a sanctuary where dreams and memories intertwined. Guided by a gentle instinct, Aoi wandered deeper into the bamboo grove until she reached a small clearing she had never noticed before. At its center stood an ancient stone pedestal, moss-covered and worn smooth by time. Resting upon it was a simple wooden box, bound with faded red silk. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the lid, revealing inside a collection of tiny, delicate seeds, each one shimmering faintly, as if touched by moonlight. A note lay folded beneath them, written in her grandmother's elegant hand. "These are the seeds of our dreams, carefully gathered and saved. Plant them with hope, nurture them with love, and watch as new life blossoms from the stories we hold dear." Aoi's heart swelled with emotion. The garden's secret was not just the plants or the stones, but the legacy of care, hope, and connection passed down through generations. She understood now that she was a part of something much larger, a living thread in the endless tapestry of life. With reverence, she gathered the seeds and felt a newfound sense of purpose settle within her. Tomorrow, she would begin planting them, nurturing not just the earth, but the dreams and memories they carried. The garden was no longer just a place, it was a promise. And Aoi was ready to keep it. The dawn broke softly over Hanamori, casting a gentle glow across the village and its surrounding fields. Aoi awoke with the first light, her heart full of quiet determination. Today was the day she would plant the seeds her grandmother had left, a symbolic act of hope, renewal, and connection. Carrying the small wooden box carefully, she made her way to the garden's clearing, where the earth was still damp and cool from the morning dew. Kamami fluttered around her, his bright eyes curious and full of life, as if sensing the significance of the moment. With slow, deliberate movements, Aoi knelt by the soft soil, feeling its richness beneath her fingertips. She opened the box and held the seeds up to the sunlight, watching their faint shimmer as if they carried a hidden light. One by one, she placed each seed into the earth, covering them gently and whispering wishes for their growth, wishes for strength, resilience, and beauty. As she worked, the world around her seemed to hold its breath. The distant song of a bird, the rustle of the wind through the bamboo, the soft buzzing of bees, all blended into a serene symphony of life and renewal. Planting the seeds was more than just gardening. It was a ritual, a promise to nurture what was precious and to honor the past while embracing the future. When the last seed was tucked into the soil, Aoi sat back and looked around the garden with a peaceful smile. She felt connected to the generations before her, to the earth beneath her hands, and to the endless cycle of life that would carry her dreams forward. The seeds, small and fragile now, would one day grow into something beautiful, reminders that even the smallest beginnings could blossom into a bright and lasting future. Weeks passed, and the garden began to transform. Tiny green shoots pushed bravely through the soil where Aoi had planted the seeds, reaching upward toward the sun's warm embrace. Each day, she visited the clearing, watching as life slowly unfolded in delicate shades of green and gold. The air was filled with the scent of earth and new growth, mingling with the soft sounds of summer, the distant buzz of cicadas, the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze, and Kamami's cheerful chirps as he flitted around the blossoming plants. Aoi often found herself lost in thought as she tended the garden, feeling the pulse of life beneath her fingertips and the steady rhythm of nature's slow dance. The plants were fragile but resilient, their delicate stems bending with the wind yet never breaking. They reminded her of the quiet strength within herself, a strength nurtured by hope, patience, and love. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of amber and rose, Aoi sat beneath the growing plants, her eyes reflecting the fading light. She realized that just as the garden was blossoming, so too was a new light awakening inside her, a light that promised growth, courage, and the promise of tomorrow. In that peaceful moment, surrounded by the gentle whispers of the garden and the quiet presence of Kamami, Aoi felt ready to embrace whatever the future might hold. For like the seed she had planted, her spirit was beginning to grow strong and bright, reaching toward the endless sky. As summer deepened, the garden flourished into a vibrant patchwork of greens and golds, each leaf and stalk telling a story of resilience and renewal. Aoi walked among the rows of sprouting plants, her fingers lightly brushing the tender leaves as she whispered quiet words of encouragement, feeling the life thrumming beneath her touch. The gentle breeze carried echoes of laughter and voices long gone, memories woven into the very soil beneath her feet. In those whispers, she sensed the presence of those who had nurtured this land before her, the hands that had tilled, the hearts that had hoped, the souls that had dreamed. Aoi paused by a tall stalk of wheat, now waving proudly in the wind, and thought of her grandmother's stories, the tales of hardship and harvest, of loss and love, all intertwined in the cycles of nature. These echoes of the past were not just memories but guiding lights, illuminating the path forward. Her own hopes mingled with the legacy of those who came before, creating a bridge between yesterday and tomorrow. The garden was a living testament to this connection, a place where dreams were planted, tended, and allowed to grow. With Kamami perched gently on her shoulder, Aoi looked out over the fields, the golden waves shimmering beneath the sun. She felt a deep peace settle in her heart, knowing that she was part of something timeless, a continuous story of life, love, and hope that would endure through the seasons yet to come. The first gentle whispers of autumn began to drift through Hanamori, and the garden stood proudly in the soft, golden light of the fading season. The wheat swayed like a sea of amber waves, ripening slowly under the tender care Aoi had given them. Each stalk seemed to hum with quiet energy, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Aoi walked through the fields with Kamami close by, her hands brushing over the mature plants. She felt the weight of the season's work, the long days of planting, nurturing, and waiting, all coming to fruition in this moment of stillness and anticipation. The harvest was not just about gathering crops, but about celebrating the cycles of life, the fruits of patience, and the rewards of hope. As she stood beneath the wide open sky, Aoi thought about the future, about the new seeds she would plant, the stories she would pass on, and the dreams she would carry forward. The promise of the harvest was more than food or abundance. It was a reminder that even after the longest wait, new beginnings would always rise. The wind picked up gently, carrying with it the scent of earth and ripened grain. Kamami chirped softly, fluttering his wings in a quiet dance. Aoi smiled, feeling the deep connection between herself, the land, and the endless circle of time. Together, they looked toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of rose and gold, a perfect ending, and yet the start of something new. As twilight settled softly over Hanamori, Aoi sat beneath the wide expanse of stars, the cool night air wrapping around her like a gentle blanket. The garden lay quiet now, bathed in silver moonlight, the golden stalks of wheat whispering softly in the breeze. Kamami nestled comfortably on her shoulder, his soft feathers warm against her skin. In the stillness, Aoi's thoughts drifted like the gentle rustle of leaves, reflecting on the journey she had traveled, from the first fragile shoots breaking through the earth, to the golden promise of harvest. Each moment felt like a thread in the intricate tapestry of her life, woven with patience, care, and quiet strength. She thought of her grandmother's words, the garden's secret, and the seeds of hope she had planted. In those memories, she found comfort and courage, a reminder that even in darkness, life continued to grow and light could always be found. Above her, the stars shimmered, timeless watchers of the world's unfolding story. Aoi felt small, yet deeply connected to the vastness around her, a single spark in the endless dance of time and nature. With a soft sigh, she closed her eyes and let the night carry her dreams, dreams of growth, renewal, and the gentle unfolding of all things to come. Before the first light of dawn, Aoi awoke to a soft stillness that seemed to hold the world in a gentle embrace. The garden, resting under a pale sky, awaited the new day with quiet patience. Kamami stirred beside her, his tiny breaths a steady rhythm in the calm morning. Stepping outside, Aoi felt the cool air brush against her skin, a fresh, clean promise. The earth beneath her feet was cool and soft, the soil rich and ready for what would come next. She walked slowly through the garden, noticing how each plant stood poised between night and day, darkness and light. In that silent moment, Aoi understood that every ending was also a beginning. The harvest she had nurtured was a gift, but it was only one chapter in a much larger story. The seeds she had planted would give way to new life, new dreams, and new journeys yet to unfold. The horizon blushed faint pink, and the first bird song filled the air, a delicate melody of hope and renewal. Aoi smiled, feeling the warmth of the rising sun touching her face, filling her heart with quiet strength. Today, she would walk forward with open eyes and a gentle spirit, ready to embrace whatever the future held. The garden had taught her that life, like the seasons, moved in cycles, each moment precious, each breath a chance to grow. With Kamami by her side, Aoi stepped into the dawn, carrying the promise of tomorrow in her heart. Later that morning, as the sun stretched higher above the hills of Hanamori, Aoi sat beneath the shade of the persimmon tree, a blank page in her lap and a brush in her hand. The garden rustled softly behind her, full of light and breath and distant bird song. Kamami dozed nearby in a warm patch of sun. She dipped the brush in ink and began to write. Not a formal letter, not a journal, but something between memory and hope. A letter to the wind, to the seasons, to her grandmother. She didn't worry about the right words. She simply let her heart speak. The seeds have grown, Ba-chan. I did what you showed me. The soil listened. The rain came when it needed to. Kamami still sings every morning. You were right. The garden does remember. It remembered you. And now I think it remembers me too. The ink dried slowly in the sun as Aoi paused, watching the leaves sway. Her thoughts moved with the breeze. I think I understand now. This place, it's not just plants and paths. It's a place where things are felt, where even silence has meaning. Sometimes I sit here and feel everything, the past, the warmth, the ache of change, and something soft beneath it all, like love that never left. She folded the letter gently and tucked it into a small bamboo tube, tied it with a thread of twine, and carried it up the hill above the garden. There, where the wind whispered through tall grasses and the view stretched toward the shimmering river, she held the tube high for a moment, then let it go. It spun once, twice, and the wind caught it, lifting it into the sky. Aoi stood there for a long time, watching until the wind took the letter beyond sight. Autumn settled into Hanamori with a hush of gold and quiet skies. The harvest was complete, the fields resting, and the garden exhaled slowly beneath soft amber sunlight. Aoi no longer moved through it with urgency, but with ease, her footsteps steady, her breath deep. Each corner of the garden told a story now. The trellis where morning glories had curled. The flat stone where she and Kamami often rested. The worn path her feet had shaped between rows of green. It all pulsed gently with memory, not loud or dramatic, but soft, steady, and alive. She no longer measured time in days, but in changes of light, in the way the wind rustled leaves differently, in the songs Kamami sang as the air cooled. Life no longer asked for answers from her, only attention, care, and the courage to remain still when stillness was needed. One evening, just before dusk, Aoi prepared tea and sat alone on the engawa, gazing out over the land. The steam curled upward, sweet and earthy, the scent mingling with the scent of dried leaves. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The garden answered in its own way, a rustle here, a breeze across her face, the distant sound of water flowing. She thought of the letter she had sent to the wind, and how nothing in nature was ever truly lost, only transformed. She smiled softly, Later, after night had fallen and the stars had stitched themselves into the sky, Aoi lay in bed with the window open. Kamami slept near the sill, feathers ruffling with each small breath. The moonlight fell across the floor like spilled milk, and just before her eyes closed, she felt it, the garden breathing in the dark, dreaming its own slow dream. And within it, Aoi's spirit nestled gently, quiet and at peace. Tomorrow would come, and she would be there to greet it. The next morning, the sky hung low and soft, like a quilt stitched from silver-gray silk. Aoi stepped quietly into the garden with a light shawl around her shoulders, warmed not by the sun but by the stillness that autumn brought. The garden was no longer bursting, it was listening. Leaves had begun to gather on the stone paths. Not in thick carpets yet, just scattered here and there like notes on a page. Each one carried its own shade, amber, rust, faded ochre, gentle red. Aoi knelt beside the old persimmon tree and ran her fingers through the leaves gathered near its roots. They crinkled like memory, dry, but full of something old and kind. Kamami fluttered down from a branch above, landing on her knee, his tiny talons warm against her skin. "I wonder if the tree misses its leaves," Aoi murmured aloud, her voice quiet enough that the wind could answer if it wanted to. The tree didn't reply in words, but its branches swayed ever so slightly, and a few more leaves drifted down, brushing past her hair, her shoulders, her open hands. The garden was teaching her again, this time, how to let go. Not with sorrow, but with grace. Later, she sat on the engawa with a cup of roasted tea, the scent toasty and calming. She watched the garden as if watching an old friend fall gently into slumber, knowing that sleep was not the end. Only the seasons breathed before a new beginning. The days grew shorter and small, nearly invisible ways. It wasn't just the sun setting earlier, it was the way the shadows lengthened before anyone noticed, how the air took on a slight dryness in the afternoon, and how the birdsong changed, fewer trills and more quiet pauses between the notes. Even the soil smelled different, softer, more thoughtful, like the scent of an old book just opened. Aoi began waking earlier, before even the birds stirred, and she found that the quiet of the garden at that hour was unlike anything else. No footsteps, no wind yet, just the breath of the earth, cool and patient. She would sit on the old wooden porch with a blanket around her shoulders and a clay cup of warm barley tea, sipping slowly, waiting for the sky to lighten. It was during one of those mornings that she noticed the small, clay brazier stored beneath the engawa. Her grandmother had once used it to burn dried herbs and bits of fragrant bark, especially during seasonal shifts. Aoi remembered the soft trails of smoke curling up into the air, as though the house itself were exhaling. She brought it out, placed it gently on the porch, and gathered a small handful of dried cedar needles and sweet fern. With a steady hand, she lit them and watched as the fire took hold. The smoke rose slowly, spiraling, then dissolving into the pale morning air. It smelled of forests, of temples, of moments passed down in silence. Aoi closed her eyes and let herself drift with it, not away from her thoughts, but deeper into them. She remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell, of how the wind would carry messages if you burned herbs with intention. of how the garden responded to more than care. It responded to presence, to noticing. And so she sat, not speaking, not moving, simply being, as the smoke rose like invisible ink, writing a quiet letter to the changing season. When Kamami arrived, a little late, with ruffled feathers and a yawn-like chirp, he didn't ask for food or play. He curled up beside her, tucked his head under his wing, and joined the stillness. That afternoon, Aoi raked the garden paths, not hurriedly, but with rhythm. With each pull of the rake, the leaves gathered into soft mounds, like little memories waiting to rest. She didn't toss them away. She made a pile beneath the old pine where the wind wouldn't scatter them too quickly. There was a kind of beauty in letting them stay a while. At sunset, the garden was golden. The light struck the falling leaves in a way that made them look like tiny flames, a slow, flickering fire drifting gently from branch to ground. Aoi stood with her hands tucked into her sleeves and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just to the day, to the tree, to the moment. The air accepted it without reply, and that was enough. The following morning brought a wind that wasn't quite cold, but not warm either, a middle breath, a wind that wandered. It wound through the branches, tapped softly against the shoji screens, and lifted the hem of Aoi's robe as she walked. It was the kind of wind, her grandmother used to say, that stirred old thoughts. Aoi paused beside the camellia bush, now stripped of its flowers, its leaves dark and glossy in the morning light. She brushed one with her fingertips. The bush didn't bloom in autumn, but it held its presence all the same, firm, evergreen, quiet. She liked that about it. As the wind tugged gently at her sleeves, she felt a memory slide loose from her mind, not summoned, not even fully formed. Just a flicker, a morning like this one, years ago, a bowl of miso soup beside her, steam rising, her grandmother humming as she ground sesame seeds in a wooden suribachi. She had been younger then, her mind still noisy with questions. Now, as the memory passed, it didn't ask to be understood. It only wanted to visit. And now I let it. She moved slowly through the garden paths, observing more than tending. The garden no longer needed hands. It needed eyes, breath, patience. The work now was not growing, but noticing, honoring. In the west corner of the garden, the last of the summer grasses swayed under the wind's whisper. Aoi sat there, among them, without tools or tasks. Kamami nestled in the crook of her elbow, eyes half closed, one claw twitching now and then in a half-dream. The world moved around them, not fast, not loud. A leaf drifted onto Aoi's shoulder. She let it rest there. She thought briefly of writing a letter. To whom, she didn't know. Maybe to the wind itself, or to the season, or to the girl she used to be. Instead, she picked up a leaf, pale orange, curled at the edges, and gently pressed it between the pages of her notebook. No words, just the shape of a moment. Later, as the shadows lengthened, she stood beneath the persimmon tree and looked up. There were only a few fruits left now, deepening into burnt orange, their weight pulling gently on the branches. She would harvest them soon, perhaps tomorrow. But not today. Today was for the wind. for memory, for stillness. And as night approached, with stars peeking behind a thin layer of cloud, Aoi whispered a small thank you to the sky, and let the breeze carry it wherever it wished. The morning arrived wrapped in hush, a pale, translucent kind of light that felt like it had taken the long way through the clouds to reach her. Aoi awoke slowly, without rush, her breath sinking with the steady rhythm of the wind brushing against the house. Somewhere in the walls, a soft creak answered the breeze, not a complaint, but a greeting. She stood at the engawa in her soft gray robe, hands cradling a cup of warm tea, eyes drifting toward the old persimmon tree. Only one fruit remained. All the others had been taken gently over the past few weeks, some given to neighbors wrapped in furoshiki cloth, some dried and strung in the kitchen, some eaten fresh in quiet moments with Kamami watching from the windowsill. But this last one clung like a lantern, deep orange and flecked with gold, its skin thin and gently wrinkled with time. She didn't rush to pick it. Not yet. Instead, she spent the morning in silence. The chores were few this time of year. The garden had entered its dreaming state. Even the bamboo stood stiller, its rattling joints subdued by the softer light. She swept the porch. She folded the laundry. She lit a single stick of sandalwood incense and let the scent meander through the open doorway. Then, just after noon, she stepped barefoot into the garden, the stone path cool beneath her feet. Kamami followed lazily, stopping now and then to peer at some unseen insect with the slow curiosity of a creature without deadlines. At the base of the persimmon tree, Aoi paused. The branch that held the fruit bowed ever so slightly, the weight of the season drawing it down. She reached up, her fingers brushing against the smooth skin of the fruit, warm from the filtered sun. She did not pluck it just yet. Instead, she closed her eyes and listened to the soft rustling of leaves, to the murmur of the wind over the tiled roof, to the breath of the garden, deep, unhurried kind. Then, without ceremony, she turned the stem gently, and the persimmon came loose in her palm like it had always been meant to. She held it for a while, studying its color, its shape. There was no perfection in it. It was just as it was, weathered, full, ready. Back in the kitchen, she sliced it in two. The flesh inside glowed amber in the afternoon light, and she ate it slowly, reverently, as if consuming not just fruit, but a whole season. When she finished, she set the seeds aside to dry, for planting, or perhaps for holding. Some things, she had learned, didn't need purpose to be cherished. And as dusk came, carrying the cold more clearly now, Aoi sat once more by the fire and whispered softly. The last persimmon, the last note of autumn. And still, the song goes on. The first true chill of the season arrived overnight. It wasn't harsh or unkind, more like a gentle tap on the shoulder, reminding Aoi to fetch the thicker blankets from the cedar chest and check that the windows were properly sealed. She rose before dawn, her breath visible in the air of her room. Outside, the trees had lost most of their leaves, and those that remained fluttered like old paper, brittle and light. The garden wore its winter bones now, its bare branches, its hushed palette of grays and soft browns. Aoi wrapped herself in her warmest haori and made her way to the hearth. She hadn't lit a fire in weeks. The brazier in the mornings had sufficed, gentle wisps of smoke and scent, but today called for real warmth. Not just for the body, but for the soul. She knelt by the fire pit, laying the kindling carefully, thin twigs first, then small cuts of pine. She remembered her grandmother's way, the rhythm of stacking, the angle of breath as she blew gently to coax the flame. Aoi imitated her without thinking. Soon the fire caught. It began with a whisper, then a crackle, then a low rustling sound like pages turning in an ancient book. The scent of pine sap and charcoal began to drift into the room. Aoi sat back on her heels and let the heat begin its slow conversation with the cold. Kamami arrived shortly after, hopping with exaggerated caution over the cool floorboards. He circled the hearth twice, then settled with a satisfied sigh close to the warmth. His feathers puffed into a round shape that made him look twice his usual size. Aoi smiled and joined him. The fire spoke in soft tones. She didn't feed it too quickly. Letting it grow with patience, she added a log now and then, spacing them so the flames didn't rise too high. This was not a fire to impress. It was a fire to remember by. As the morning deepened, Aoi prepared a simple meal. Roasted sweet potatoes wrapped in foil, placed into the coals. She brewed roasted barley tea and filled the room with its toasted aroma. It was not a feast, but it was enough. Warm food, warm light, warm breath. She thought again of her grandmother, who used to say that the cold months were not empty. They were full in a different way. In summer, things bloom. In winter, things echo, she had whispered once, as they folded laundry by the stove. Now, as the wind swept across the roof and curled against the windows, Aoi understood. Winter was not the absence of life. It was the deepening of it. The gathering in, the slowing down. The kind of silence that had roots. She reached for her notebook, the same one where she had pressed a leaf, and using a pencil dulled by use, began to write. The fire is speaking to me today. Not with words, but with presence. Not with brightness, but with weight. I think this is what stillness tastes like. Roasted yam and smoke and the memory of pine. She set the notebook aside and took another sip of tea. Outside, the wind grew bolder. Inside, the fire answered. And so the first true day of winter began, not with noise, but with warmth. Not with action, but with attention.